Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration, and collaboration creates community, and community inspires social change. I'm David Peck, and this is Face to Face.
Well, welcome to Face to Face. We have another, I think, interesting and exciting interview today with Bryan Weber from YMCA. He's the VP of Financial Development for Hamilton-Burlington-Brantford. Thanks for joining us today, Bryan.
Thank you, David. Yeah.
We're going to talk about generosity today. We're going to talk about giving. We're going to talk about maybe the notion of giving back, things like compassion fatigue, donor fatigue, what appears to be, as Canadians are supposed to be pretty generous people, or at least that's what most of us have been led to believe. So maybe we'll get into some statistics, but I think Bryan, where I'd really like to start before we even hear a little bit more about you, is what are some of the reasons why people give of their time, or give money to an organization, or sponsor a child through Save the Children, or volunteer at a hospital?
Sure. Well, I think giving typically starts from your heart and your own experiences. So if you've benefited from an organization personally, or a family member, parent, grandparent, child, grandchild, that's usually where the giving relationship starts with any organization. Most giving, if we look at numbers, as you suggest, we might want to cover that today. $10 billion roughly in Canada. 85% of that is you and I, individuals. The balance is corporations and giving foundations. Most people, when they think about philanthropy, they actually think most of the money comes from corporations.
Right.
But, as you've just heard, less than 15% actually comes from business. I think that's primarily because they demand great recognition for their support.
Right.
Not so much for individuals. But of that $10 billion, between 45 and 50% of that is faith-based. So religious organizations, churches, synagogues, mosques, all faiths, or programs related to mission delivery in all of those different organizations. So,
and when you say mission delivery, you don't mean missionary. You mean could be food banks, could be
house
local
building
programs,
ministries, whatever.
like a Habitat, for instance, or those kinds of things. Okay, good.
Yeah. So the giving experience often starts there, from something that's moved you and moved your heart, and at least the meaningful giving. We're all asked to give to charities every day. It comes in our mail, on our email, personal relationships. I call those go-away gifts. Typically, depending on your income, people will make a gift to that so that you go away. And for me, that used to be $20, and I'm earning a little bit more, so that's $50 now. And just because somebody asked, and I don't really have an investment in that organization, but I have an investment in the person, the relationship
that maybe asked
me.
Right.
Yeah.
There's so much we can talk about. I'd love to talk about people coming to your door and knocking on your door, because that seems to be getting more popular today. But I just want to tease something out. So my father, Parkinson's disease for many years. My dad and I went to a few meetings together. It was something never that really resonated with him or my mother, I don't think, the actual support mechanism of other people. I've been working in international development, as my listeners will know, for many years, and I've a real passion for Cambodia, but have been starting to realize that, hang on a second here, giving is, it's not either or.
Yeah.
And it's one of my favorite things to talk about on the podcast, is the way we all seem to polarize things. So it's about this or it's about that. It's about up, it's about down. Well, as the more countries you travel to, the more you realize we're all just in this together. We're all a mess. We're all the same. We all have the same needs and desires and hopes and wants and fears. Plenty of work to be done here in our backyard. You at the YMCA know that as well. Why am I not giving to the Parkinson's Foundation? I don't give to them regularly. I don't volunteer with them. And yet, my father's life was wasted, basically, in some regards, by this disease. Anyway, I've not thought about it until right this very second.
Yeah.
And yet I've got this, when I look back in my faith-based background, when I look back at the connections to people going overseas to do work in particular countries, and it's always been a part of my life. Okay, now it's starting to make sense why I'm here today, why I went through an international development program, and so on. So, something.
Why are you not giving to Parkinson's?
Yeah,
I think it's a fair question, but I wouldn't dismiss the possibility that you would give to Parkinson's in the future.
In the future, right.
I know that you recently lost your father, and those relationships, that will be a lifelong relationship for you that may surface in a different way in a year, 5 years, 10 years from now. We're all sort of products of our experience, and so that may be part of it. Another part of it is the Parkinson's organization better be organized well enough to know that your father suffered with the illness, and I mean, they can't callously approach you in your period of grief, but there are 85,000 charities in Canada.
Yes.
And I think, as you said when we were talking earlier, there are many, many fundraisers. There are many fundraising and fundraisers that we can all get better at organizing ourselves and doing better work. So don't blame yourself for not giving to Parkinson's, and let's see what the future lies, but also recognize that in some ways it's very much the organization's responsibility to get to you. And
well, I mean, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you look at somebody let's go down the Parkinson's road for a second, Michael J. Fox.
Yeah.
He's written several books about it now. He advocates for it. He's got his own foundation. He's putting in tons of money into Parkinson's research, which would never have happened if he hadn't developed it at 45, or he was pretty young, around the same age as my dad, I think.
Okay.
When my dad was diagnosed. So, and that's not, I'm not making a judgment. It's not a good or a bad thing. I just think it's kind of interesting that Parkinson's would not have been on probably Michael J. Fox's radar at all.
No, absolutely. Yeah. No, and I think, and I know a little bit about your interest in Southeast Asia and Cambodia in particular, which has driven a lot of your own decisions about career and work and study.
Yes.
But in the end, I think you're answering something that's really in your heart.
Yeah. There's some kind of calling.
Yeah.
And it's so, I was with the videographer in our last trip, and we were, working on behalf of a couple organizations, and he said to me several points throughout the trip, there's just something about this country. I don't know what it is. It's just, I don't know if it's the people or if it's, and there's this mystery, there's this edge, or, and we commiserated on that. We agreed, but I don't know that it's called the Kingdom of Wonder. Wonder. But I mean, we all have stories like this, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not 100% sure exactly what it is.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think it's a heartful kind of calling, or answer to a calling, perhaps.
Yeah. And I think most of us don't make the time to listen to our heart. We're busy day to day, and only getting faster by the day with technology and social media. We can't read more than 140 characters. And I think the more time that we can make in reflection and to consider what matters to each of us, I think we'll make better decisions on what resources we have, what skills we want to share, and ultimately affect career decisions and family decisions.
So we talked about, what would be the subject for this podcast, this interview, our discussion, our conversation. We talked around the idea of the joy of generosity, which I think is a great title for a book or an essay or a podcast.
Yeah.
I know lots of people who would say there's probably not a whole lot of joy in giving, because that's actually taking something from me. I'm not. What about my house payment? What about my my food bills? I've got a few friends who are struggling right now. And they're probably not in a giving mode.
Yeah.
So is that just a window in their lives, or is what are we talking about here? It just it doesn't necessarily sound joyful to me.
No, because I think there's a lot of uncertainty about our own employment situation, the debt that we're carrying. Debt is a huge obstacle to giving. If they don't feel like they can manage their own expenses, why are they going to give anything away? And one of my colleagues recently said there was a notion of the joy of giving, and he flipped it around and called it the joy of asking. It's sharing a giving experience with somebody and presenting that opportunity for them to experience what it's like to give. And what I'm getting at here is more than the go-away gift. Giving to a point where it hurts a bit, and it makes you think. I had an early experience with this. My wife and I, virtually living paycheck to paycheck, young family. The girls, we have 3 girls, they would have been 3, 5, and 6, or maybe a little bit older than that. And we thought it would be nice to have a special Christmas. We don't have a lot of money. We had a surplus computer. We thought we could probably get a few $100s for that computer. This is back in the early 90s when you advertised in papers to sell things and not online.
The penny saver.
The penny saver.
A friend of mine met his wife. No kidding.
No way.
Through the penny saver, the Brampton penny saver.
Wow, we've come a long way.
That's right.
Penny's way.
That's right.
Fine, I love that. Anyway, we decided we'd sell the computer, raise a few $100s, and have some money to buy something special for the girls. So we posted the ad, got a call from a Polish fellow that recently emigrated to Canada with his son. And so he called and said he's interested in the computer. Could I bring it over? And he sort of put it through its paces to see if he's willing to pay and buy the computer. So I took the computer over, met with this gentleman and his son. They were in a very modest apartment above a grocery store. We were in Burlington, and so I let him go through the evaluation of the computer, and at the end he said, "Yeah, I'll pay you the money that you're asking, $300." And so
didn't even try to barter?
No barter. He just paid the full price. Paid the full price. And so I thought, this is wonderful, but I was really shaken by this man's story to think, here I was in Burlington with a roof and a mortgage, mind you, but a roof nonetheless, and a full fridge of food, and a good job, and a car, and all of that. This guy would use a bus to get to job interviews and all of that. And so I got back to my car in the parking lot of where this fellow's apartment was, and looked at these 3 $100 bills, and decided at that moment I couldn't take the money. It would be good for me to give it back to this man. So I turned around, knocked on his door, and gave him his money back. I walked back to my car in tears.
Yeah,
came home,
quite a moment.
Told my wife the story. And she wasn't disappointed for a moment that we didn't have the money.
That's cool. You're going to have me in tears over here in a second, Bryan. We're going to have to pause the podcast.
Yeah, but it was the richest Christmas by far.
Yeah.
You know, I used to think at that...
Did your daughters know at that time? Did you tell them, or was this later on?
No, they were too young to hear that story.
Right,
but
right.
Peggy and I were
thinking...
thinking...
What do you mean you gave the money away? What about our Christmas gifts?
Yeah. Whatever they got that Christmas was sufficient.
Right.
But what I didn't realize was I was given a far greater gift than I could have ever imagined.
And how long ago would this have been?
At least 15 years ago.
Okay. So this predates your development work, your
I wasn't
financial work.
No.
Yeah.
And so it was a moment like, wow. It was a gift that was unexpected. It hurt a little bit.
Yep.
But the return was so enormous.
Well, clearly, I mean, the demeanor here, you know, you're on the edge of tears, and obviously a huge impact on you. And I mean, I'd like to think we all have stories like that.
Yeah.
Not necessarily of, you know, giving away X amount of dollars, or the parking lot, or the Polish side, or the computer side. But I guess maybe what interests me is a couple things. Why that sudden moment, that you had this realization, this almost epiphany in a way, that, you know, clearly this man's story really stuck with you as well.
Yeah.
You didn't mistrust him. You clearly trusted him. This was the real deal. He wasn't a con man trying to put one over you to get a free computer, etc. But, you know, why we wouldn't all react that way,
right.
Brian. Like,
yeah.
I mean, we'd go, wow, this is awesome. He didn't even barter.
Yeah.
Boom, off to
yeah.
Toys R Us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that either, I don't
Sure.
think, right? It's a transaction. It's I'm giving the guy the computer, I'm getting my $300 where everybody's good.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that, I think,
Where
because
did
I
it
would
come-
say more often than not, most people wouldn't react that way. That'd be my guess.
Yeah. Well, it's a fair question. I, at the time, was brand new to this faith journey that I was on. I was beginning to explore my Christian interests at the time. So this may very well have been an intervention of the Spirit. Or a combination of that with the realization that this man had so much less than I did, and I was coming to that transaction with sort of a notion of scarcity, that I didn't have enough. And what was revealed was I did have enough.
Right.
And the great disparity of the world that we're in, that there are greater and lesser people, in terms of resources at least, for every person. And what is my role in that? And so divine intervention possibly, or just a momentary revealing of that truth. That
if you were to go back and, I don't know, write this down and write a paper, or you're going to do a 1-hour presentation, would there be anything that preceded that? Would there have been any experiences, discussions with your wife, your kids, a trip to, I don't know, Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
Not being able to give somebody some money on the side of the road who asked you, things like that some sort of thread that might have led up to that kind of a moment?
Yeah, I think, I don't know the exact timing, but prior to that, we had recently adopted a foster child, a monthly foster plan, and it was a suggestion from our pastor at the time, and we thought that would be a good message to the children, that we have one more family member that doesn't live here with us in Canada.
Right.
She lives outside the country, and we set up a letter writing exchange, and as the Children's Fund does, and makes it easy to do. So a little taste of giving,
sure.
And what that might be, but it was like $30 a month. It wasn't a big investment. So that might have been part of it, may have led up to it. Don't know.
Yeah, I am always fascinated. I mean, even on the side of the street, I've been in meetings with NGO leaders who work in the field, who are, supposedly generous and are giving. But when it comes time to pay the tip, or we bump into somebody on the way back to the car on the street who's asking for money, there seems to be a very distinct lack of generosity. It seems to me, and I get criticized for being a heavy tipper. But I actually do it and I give to people who ask me for money on the street. And I've been leveled for that too by others, because there's a lack of responsibility. What are you doing? You're feeding into a drug habit, and I say, you know what? My responsibility, I believe, ends at the ask. I've been asked by somebody who I don't know their situation, and I actually, so I do take some joy, frankly, out of giving somebody a toonie or a $5 bill, and actually going beyond their expectations, or at least I try to. And I often say to people, you know what? This is also for me. This is a reminder to me. When I see somebody on the road like this is a reminder to me that there, but for the grace, this could be me. We don't know the situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know. I don't think we need any more reasons to think about ourselves.
No, I think that's well said. I've come to terms with panhandlers as well. I agree with you 100%. It's a reminder for us, but it's also something that I didn't necessarily know years ago. None of us sit in the seat of judgment of that individual's circumstance. And so to put conditions on the gift, to say, I insist that you take this $5 bill and go to Tim Hortons and get something nutritious versus alcohol. recognize that you have that $5 in your pocket for a reason, and it may very well be to just give away. My daughter had an experience recently where she was in a restaurant with friends having breakfast, and one of our family friends was in the restaurant with her and noticed that our daughter was also eating in the restaurant, and they happened to finish earlier than our daughter and her friends, and what they did was they paid her bill.
Nice.
And
that's pretty fun.
It was a brilliant message to my daughter and all of her friends that the bill was paid by a complete stranger. My daughter figured out who it was. But this friend of mine, we share this great adventure of generosity, he just had this lightness of step for the rest of his day.
Yeah.
Because he didn't want the receiver to know. That goes back to that sort of anonymous giving thing that we talked about earlier. But just the experience of the gift and just giving it away.
Are Canadians generous?
They're not as generous as Americans. If you look at the numbers, average giving is about a third of what Americans give. The social net is a great argument and a great reason why Canadians say they don't give as generally as they...
Because we're all Marxists up here.
Yeah, that's right. We pay it in taxes and all of that.
Those communists as Canadians.
Yeah. But here at the Y, the work that I do, we learn a lot from our American colleagues about generosity. Their schools and alumni systems and...
I guess we could do the numbers, right? Was it about $8.5 billion? I thought it was less than that as for individual giving. So $8.5 billion divided by what, 33 million?
Yeah. They're over 300
I was going to say,
billion.
it's about, I heard there was about... 330 million in the U.S., right?
We're 10, so they're... that's at least 10 to 1. Geez, I don't have the American data.
Well, I remember a few years back learning that Canadians on average gave about $350 a year per family, or is that per individual?
That's an individual taxpayer. That's based on those that file a tax return.
Right.
That's how Stats Canada measures the numbers.
So if we're going to talk about generosity, so Canadians aren't that generous, what about with time? What about with ideas? What about with mentoring? That kind of thing.
That's a good question, because generosity goes way beyond money.
Yeah, we've been talking mostly about money and the guy on the street asking for a bit of cash and so on.
Yeah.
But I think,
it's generosity of everything. It's generosity of spirit.
Yes.
That.
Well, hang on. I think I met you because of somebody I know on a board who you met at a Friday night get-together where you guys volunteered to feed local homeless folk.
Yeah.
So there you go. Feed. So not all about that just hit me. I totally had forgotten about that.
Yeah. That Friday night dinner, we call it Friday Night Community at Wellington Square, has just been a gift to our church. 200 plus people every week come for a free meal. Chani and I are among the people that we just break bread and have a meal with these people that are in a different circumstance in life, and the friendships that both Chani and I and others that serve in this role have developed from that experience. And you've heard it said, you get more than you give in most volunteer experiences, and this is true to that. But I've learned a lot about this notion of looking out for our fellow person, that none of us should ignore that responsibility. But generosity touches, I hate this expression, but time, talent, and treasure. Totally overused expression, but...
Do you have a PowerPoint presentation on that? Time, talent, treasure?
Yeah. It's, it really does break it down into what each of us can bring to any organization or any community or any circumstance. But when I listen to some of the people that we work with here at the Y and some of our donors, they have a generosity of spirit that the glass is half full for them. They see the possibilities. They bring. They don't come from scarcity. They come from abundance, and I think that's one of the opportunities we have at when we talk about Canadians versus Americans. it seems in Canada, most of the conversation right now is this corporate social responsibility paradigm that businesses are starting to wake up to. Imagine Canada set a threshold for a caring company, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago. If they gave 1% of their after-tax profit, they were a caring company. 1%. I just think that's pathetic. That bar is so low.
It's pretty low.
And I get that private enterprise they have stakeholders and all of that, but it's no wonder that $10 billion, why we only see 1.5 coming from corporate Canada, is that, and foundations.
Well, isn't it of Friedman? I mean, I rail on this with my students at Humber, but Friedman said that the social responsibility of business is to increase profits, period.
Yeah, that's right.
Back in the 70s, classic essay.
Yeah.
And I think to some degree, our understanding of the free market has been built on that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
No, 1% I think is almost less than zero.
Yeah. Well, it's ironic that the Occupy movement ended up with that number themselves.
Yeah.
The 99% versus the 1%. It's such an imbalance of rich and poor.
So let's go back to, you mentioned about a couple minutes ago this notion of scarcity and abundance.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you and I are kind of on the same page.
Yeah.
I mean, when it came down to what our numbers would be, our thresholds, I'm sure they're probably a little different. I've got younger children than you do, et cetera, maybe more liabilities, who knows, right? Not a lot of money in philosophy, Brian. But you look at corporate executives and their understanding, or you go to Southeast Oakville or South Oakville, and you say, what's the difference between North Oakville? I live in North Oakville. Well, I live in a 1,600 square foot house. Well, down in South Oakville, you got your 16,000 square foot house. Yeah. So their understanding of scarcity and abundance is very different. Is that part of the problem, do you think? Like, I've tried to get to the bottom of it, and I can't. I mean, I'm still working on it, and I still work in the field. And, you know, how do you challenge people to think about others? How do you get people to get out of their own backyards?
Yeah.
And I've asked lots of people this question, and I don't think there's an answer. I think it's, this is why I'm so fascinated by your experience with the man who bought the computer.
Yeah.
I certainly don't need a 16,000 square foot home. I don't think any family of four does. I think that's kind of obscene capitalism. Getting in the way of my humanity. Yeah. That's how I would sort of describe it, and yet I guess they don't.
Well, I was going to say, the person that's living in the 16,000 square foot house, many do realize that there's an emptiness to that.
Maybe so.
And they've never either been given the opportunity to try a different way. They've never been asked to try a different way. It's a competition. They end up in circles where they outdo one another with the size of the planes that they own or the cars that they own. And there's such an emptiness to all that. And I think if most rich people were honest with themselves, that there's a spiritual void and emptiness that comes from seeking material wealth. And to invite someone with that kind of wealth to make a gift that they would never expect to make. The key is, in our work, I'll give you a little insight. There are three things that need to be in place for someone to make a major gift. A, they have to have the money, so the capacity to give. Secondly, the interest in the organization. So whether it's interest in Parkinson's because my father passed away,
Cambodia,
or I went to Camp Wanakita, so I'm interested in the why. There's my interest. And then the linkage, what I call linkage. Linkage is connecting, putting the person in front of that individual.
You're the linkage, aren't you?
I'm often the linkage, or our CEO is the linkage, or a volunteer is the linkage.
Right. Doesn't, in the book Forces for Good, don't they talk about them as being evangelists?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Which is a bit of an unfortunate phrase
they
use, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
But the person that person of wealth would have the most difficulty saying no to.
Right.
They trust that person.
Right.
So they've heard the case, they've got the money, and they're listening to the person that they really trust. And those are the sort of stars that need to be lined up for an individual to really step out. Now that's major giving, sort of major giving 101. But I think we all have that opportunity. Me, as I was telling you earlier, a young father with limited resources, giving up $300 that was a material amount of money to our family. But we all have that opportunity. We don't all need those 3 stars in place to step out and try it.
And so you said we want to put the person in front of this high net worth donor that would have the most difficulty saying no to.
Yeah.
That's not, for you, I don't get the sense from you that's just because this is a cash grab.
No.
There's way more going on here.
We're investing in a relationship, and donors increasingly care about the outcome of their gift.
Right.
So
there's definitely been a shift, I would say, in the last 10, 15 years, and I'm seeing it in the international development sector, with government donors, results-based management. Tell me about the impact. Tell me, and I think it's a bit troubling and a bit problematic, frankly, when you want to see impact in a year, for a gift. But at the same time, I think it's also a good indication that donors, hopefully, or some donors are becoming more interested in the work that they're giving to.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're writing a check for $100, you care less about exactly how that money's used. If you're writing for $10,000, you're going to follow and track that organization because it's a bigger number. But that gets away a little bit from the notion of generosity. I'm not suggesting that any of us should be writing blank checks and expecting and giving anybody total trust in the because you just want to give your money away. It's a relationship. You're both investing in an outcome, and you can grow from that experience. So my recommendation to a donor that hasn't had that joyful experience yet, make a really big gift. Just try it. Do your research. For sure. Do your research. And trust and see the CEO and the whites of his or her eyes and know that they'll deliver. But make a gift that you just didn't think you'd ever make and track it.
Why is it so hard, and maybe this is my own frustration coming out with all the organizations I've worked with over the years. You and I offline before the recorder was on, we're talking about capital campaigns. And, if you want to become a fundraiser, raise money for a camp. That's an easy sell. And it's hard to raise money, I think. I've always considered myself a relational guy, but I don't know that I'd make a great fundraiser because I have trouble sitting here with you. I can hang with you for 2-3 hours and we'd have a great time. I don't think I'm going to ask you to write a check for me for $10,000 though.
Right.
And maybe that's just a skill I need to develop. I don't know. But why is it so hard to get guys and women, guys in an inclusive sense, to donate to capacity building, to donate to administration, to donate to the bells, the whistles, the nuts, and the bolts? You know what? I'd love to end the sex trade in Southeast Asia. I would love to end TB. Well, to do those things, or I would love to end homelessness in Hamilton. To do those things, thousands of dollars are required, and yet, I don't know. Maybe you have a different experience, Brian, but you can hear the frustration in my opinion.
We have we see a lot of donors that kind of segment themselves. They'll invest in program or they'll invest in capital, and it's rare the donor that will invest in capacity building because those are donors typically that have a much longer term view on outcomes. There is no shortage of problems to solve in this world, and no one of us or no one organization is going to solve everything. But if a donor through their giving experience can solve something for a period of time, then we've accomplished something. So
fair point,
I think there's a great unfortunate circumstance in our business right now where charities are measured on the effectiveness of their fundraising dollar. It takes money to raise money. And so if it costs us 15 cents or 20 cents on the dollar of funds raised, and I pushed that to 25 or 30 and ended up raising significantly more money to achieve a much greater outcome, then why wouldn't we spend that money?
Yeah, of course. Well, then at that point, it's no longer about the admin, it's about efficacy.
Yeah.
Right? You got the light shining in the wrong place.
Yeah. exactly.
It seems to me, anyway.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've said this on a podcast before, because I'm not sure that I've talked to anyone in an interview about this, but I actually kind of blame the nonprofit sector in a way, or at least blame, I don't like, hold responsible for this focus on results and impact. I'm all about results and impact.
Right.
I do want to end the sex trade. I do want to end homelessness in Hamilton, and so on and so on. But these things just, they're a little more complex. Mm-hmm. They're a little more nuanced.
Yeah.
And I think if nonprofits had told from the get-go that, hang on guys, this isn't about 100% of your donation going here, or the child sponsorship agencies, for instance, if they had told us a little bit more in a transparent way where all that money was going, I think we might be in a different place today.
Interesting.
You know, the fine print should have been maybe type 12, and as a printer, you'd appreciate that. Instead of being 22 font, which you can't read without a magnifying glass. Oh yeah, it's all there, David.
Yeah.
Of course it's there. We're transparent, but nobody reads it.
Yeah.
You're
absolutely right. It's self-inflicted over time.
Troubling.
Yeah, we brought this on ourselves, but I sense that it's changing. In the end. If you want to have greater impact, you need more resources, and it takes resources to get resources. And communications is a huge part of our work now, telling your story. If you can tell your story, then you'll engage people and then grow relationships from that. And in time, I like to reflect on the story that McMaster University had. My colleague Roger Trull, who has since retired from McMaster University, started a relationship with Michael DeGroot 20 years ago. His very first gift to McMaster was $500. Roger and his team did an outstanding job nurturing that relationship over 20 years. And at the end of that 20-year cycle, Mr. DeGroot made the single largest gift to any Canadian university ever made, $105 million. But it started
awesome.
with the $500 gift and a very planful approach to managing that relationship.
And who was that? Roger
Trull.
He should write a book about that.
Oh yeah,
That's fantastic.
Yeah, he's our local
and just focus
expert
on the one relationship, for heaven's sakes.
Yeah, he's very talented, and he's got a great team, now led by Mary Williams, who is equally talented.
Like, I would love to ask the question, so when you went in, that first gift, did you ever in a million years think that someday you'd be getting an over $100 million check from this guy?
Well, I tell you, every $500 gift I get now, I ask the same question. Is this leading to a much...
Well, and I think that speaks to motivation, it speaks to intention and your passion and your commitment to the work, and I think I think that's great, actually. What a great lesson for all of us to see every one of these potential relationships as way more than just a $100 million check, although it could lead to that as well. Or at least that's what I take from that.
Sure.
Maybe that's the platonic idealist. But what a great story.
Yeah.
That's amazing. What did he do along the way? Was it a lot of golf?
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that. Roger's a golfer and did spend a lot of his career on the golf course with donors. And in fact, Roger has, I don't know how many holes in one. It's a ridiculous number. But
so the lesson, folks, is if you want to raise funds, become a scratch golfer.
Right. Get out to the driving range and practice. I think it was a very planful relationship building exercise, and there were a whole bunch of gifts in between that, 500 and 105, to grow the relationship. But the point is, here's a guy that's now late in life, that's looking to accomplish something meaningful. Here's a guy that's now late in life, that's looking to accomplish something meaningful in his life. And McMaster is an outstanding institution to be investing in, no question. And some of his latest giving is going directly to his, there's a pain clinic, a pain research initiative underway at McMaster that Mr. DeGroot suffers from a lot of pain currently. He's got, I don't know exactly what the condition is, but back to your earlier question, it's his personal experience.
Yeah, of course.
And so if he could have a legacy of a gift that help somebody avoid this pain, then
well,
he
and
will.
research and planting seeds and
Yeah.
young minds, and I mean, it's just so wonderful, right? There's just so layered.
Yeah, but you look at Michael DeGroot, he's our local high net worth philanthropist. Andrew Carnegie out of Pittsburgh that sold what is now U.S. Steel in the 30s, I think it was, 30s or 40s, for $400 million. A lot of money at that time. Invested in the network of libraries across North America. There are, I believe 3,500 libraries in communities across North America. A great number of those in Canada. Legacy. He knew how to make money making steel.
Yeah.
But in the end, it wasn't enough. He wanted to accomplish something even greater. And there are others like, well, you look at Warren Buffett. And And
I've just read Life is What You Make It. Have you read that?
No, I haven't.
Wow, it's got to be on everybody's list. It's Peter Buffett, Warren's son. He talks about, I mean, obviously his privileged background and so on, but Dad didn't give me a lot of money, really.
Yeah.
When you look at how much money he has, it went fast. And now I write music, and I'm an artist, and this, that, and it's wonderful, marvelous book.
I'll have to give it a read.
Yeah. How do you not become cynical about the relational side of it? Oh, this is a relationship. This is relationship building because I want to get the gift.
Yeah.
And how do you maintain a sense of intimacy and maybe not get the gift, right?
Yeah.
And because you can't always know. So I guess there's a lot of questions there, Brian. It's not a job, it's a passion, it's a calling, it's, so there's a lot going on there.
You know what? There's a lot behind that question that you just asked. I think one of the most important attributes for any fundraiser is patience and integrity. If you don't believe in what you're presenting, if you don't believe in the mission of the organization and its impact, then you're working for the wrong organization, for starters. But if you start a relationship from the point of when am I going to get the gift and how big is it going to be, then you'll get a smaller gift, but you'll leave behind a lot. We have to invest in the long term and do a really good job bringing the right opportunities to the right people. There are lots of people with wealth that have no interest in what we're doing at the YMCA.
Right.
I hope that I do a reasonably good job to minimize my time with those individuals, because there's not going to be any joy for them and no great outcome for our organization either. But if I find people that I can tell in sharing the story that it's meaningful to them, then that's a relationship that I want to pursue and build over a long period of time. So in development, organizations are getting really smart about investing in the long term. Boards are waking up to the fact that major gifts don't come in a year. They don't come in 2 years. It may take 3, it may take 4. And giving development offices time to build those relationships.
We got to come to the end of this interview in a couple minutes, and I hate that. I really hate that about a good conversation. But anyway, that's another topic for another interview. But I really do want you to touch a little bit on how this all started for you. I mean, we've talked a bit about your faith-based background and coming from the heart and the Polish computer guy, which is. Do you remember his name?
No, I don't.
Okay, that's
terrible.
Anyway,
I should know.
but that's fine. It's just still such a wonderful story.
Yeah.
You started fundraising. So you're a printer.
Yeah.
And then you started fundraising as a volunteer.
Yeah.
And I think you even said that was before any real faith-based kind of edge.
Yeah.
So that's also interesting to me. We don't have time to pursue that. But anyway, so you volunteered for 11 months or so, and that led then to a position and a complete radical shift at the age of 40.
Yeah. Exactly.
Can you talk a little bit about that as we wrap this up? Unfortunately, that's a horrible question to ask near the end, but still, I think it's a nice way to come full circle.
Sure, great, thank you, David. It is. I think as we were talking earlier, for the last 20 or 25 years, fundraisers have become fundraisers from the back door. They don't come in the front door. There hasn't been a front door for fundraising. It's how did we all get here? Mine was truly a back door. I was new to the Hamilton community, looking for a way to meet people in the community, trying to grow a printing company. Through my a family relationship, I was invited to volunteer here at the YMCA for a capital campaign. And I started going out on campaign calls with the CEO at the time, Scott Haldane, and this guy was a wonderful storyteller, and I got such a thrill out of hearing him tell the story, seeing the response from the people that we would share stories with, sharing my own limited experience, and how amazing it was to see these gifts come. And I thought, wow, I could do more of this. So I'd make more calls, and it was a very rich experience.
This is after hours? Would this
after hours? Well, it was during business hours typically. Occasionally we'd have a dinner meeting or a breakfast meeting, start of day, end of day kind of thing. Work it into your day.
Because you were still working, right?
Yeah,
at the time?
Still working full time in sales, but ultimately I was building relationships in the community that could benefit the printing company that we were trying to build. So there was a bit of a self-serving interest in all of that. But what I was discovering was there's great attraction to this charitable sector that I'd never given much thought to in the past. So started a good relationship with the CEO. He asked me to consider joining his board, which I agreed to, and that was another wonderful experience. And as part of being on the board, you're involved in the annual campaign and helping with raising resources to help kids get to the Y. And so on the board for a little over 2 years, and at the time the printing interest that I had seemed to be fading. It had reached a point where I don't think it was going to work out. So I shared this with the CEO and at the time, and he said, well, we're thinking of starting a campaign for our Camp Wanakita, and we'll be hiring. We'll need to put you through the interview process, but would you think about coming to work for us at the Y? And here I was, 40 or 41, young family, where a lot of people buy a nice red sports car at that time of their life, and clearly I didn't have the money for a red sports car. But it was clear to me that this was meaningful work. And it was also at a time when my oldest daughter was about to, I think, enter high school, and this whole take your kid to work day thing. And that was weighing on me, thinking, I would want my children to be proud of the work that I do, and that was sort of behind a part of that. And I accepted the offer. And as you said, my faith journey was in parallel to that. And I think the two converged, that he's got me in a place where I belong, and I truly enjoy the work that I do. It's not work. Sure, there are days where it feels like work.
Sure.
That's the nature of any vocation, but it's meaningful. And I used to say, David, when I was in printing, if I ever needed to get lifted up, I'd go spend some time with a customer, because I'd be with them and listening to their circumstance and engage with them. Now in my work, if I want to be lifted up, I'm with a donor and talking about the why, talking about their life and their circumstance.
I think that's a brilliant way to end, in the sense that we're ending on the other, and we're ending on this idea of giving is way more than just a one-way street. It's a community thing. It's very inclusive. Thanks a lot for taking the time today. We've gone a little longer than usual, but once again, we've shown there is way more going on than meets the eye. So thanks for doing this.
My pleasure, David. Thank you.